Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, December 29th, 2016. Time for another show. Maybe this will be the year that we adopt the Daily Show schedule and make Thursday our last show of the week. I don't think so. It'd be difficult to let you go for the weekend without a Friday roundup. And, of course, we have our weekly visits, which, it's fallen apart a little bit lately. I'll accept the blame for that, for having Josie Duffy Rice join us. So we'll shoot for that. We'll keep things as is for just a little while longer. What do you say? Or maybe the whole year. Or maybe forever. It would be awfully difficult to give up a Friday show. But who cares? This isn't a Friday show. It's a Thursday show. And it's time to catch up with the madness that may have taken place since yesterday. It's been kind of a quiet week. I think it is everywhere just because it's the week between, it's the holiday week. A lot of the kids are off from school. A lot of people are off from work, taking vacations. Even Donald Trump, I think, is down in Florida at the Florida place, which doesn't at all signify anything. I don't know. 70 years old and he's spending time all the time down in his Florida house. I'm just saying it's a normal thing to do. It's just, okay. I don't know if he would want us to take clear note of, how old he is and how he's the oldest person ever to assume the presidency, et cetera, et cetera. His doctor certainly avoided it for the longest time. Just in passing, I see that The Hill, because The Hill always grabs my attention. Again, they do a fantastic job with the self-promotion. But The Hill tweeting the story, Trump writing his own inaugural address inspired by Reagan and JFK. According to a report, anyway, in The Hill, I don't know whether it's The Hill's own reporting or they're reporting someone else's reporting, but didn't we just read within the last couple of days? I didn't note it on the show because I didn't think it was of any particular significance, but that just goes to show how much I know. I thought the last couple days' news was about how he had assigned the task. It was big news that he had assigned the task of writing the inaugural address to who? Is it Stephen Miller? I think we started to profile him a little while ago. We may still have his profile in pocket. Maybe we'll pull that one out and take a look at it. But he was I think the speechwriter for the convention speech, which I didn't get particularly good reviews, and as I recall, everybody was worried about how dark it was. But of course, I guess you can't argue with the results. I guess now that the election is over, I suppose if that's all you're looking at. But he's certainly a better speechwriter than I would imagine Donald Trump is himself. He used to be much better spoken, as we talked about the other day. I don't know if I would put that to him now. And also of course, I suspect he's lying right now. We'll see what The Hill has to say about those things after we take care of a few other items, of course. Let's see, for instance, our morning tweet from Bill in Portland, Maine, as always, which, of course, has scrolled pretty quickly down the screen. Daily Coast Radio is live, though. I can tell you that much. Kagro X, that's me. That changes not at all from day to day. Is here to usher you into the age of computer, so you know exactly what's going on. That's well put. Donald Trump also has spent the morning. He's so awkward in the way he speaks. I've come to read what he says in the same awkward voice. I was watching. I'll have to scroll back and see if I can find a copy of it. And it might have come from The Hill. My suspicion is, as most things that catch my eye they are from The Hill. And he said, oh yeah, right. He was, I don't know what prompted it, because who can ever tell what prompts anything he says, but didn't he say, he was talking about, I don't know what, about reacting to the hacking ideas or what, and he said, computers have, in writing it says, computers have complicated lives very greatly, or something like that, it was something very close to that. Let me see if I can dig it up. And I was reading it in the weirdest way, because he's usually expressing things in the weirdest way. And I was looking like, computers have complicated lives? No, they don't. They don't have lives at all. They're computers. And to the extent that they're oh, I see. They have complicated our lives. Okay. So I wanted to answer him. No, they don't. And just to see now, does anybody know what I'm talking about if I answered it that way? What was the quote? I'll see if I can't pull it up. Let's see. Computers have complicated lives. They really don't. Their lives are, I think, fairly simple and straightforward. Yeah, here it is. I think the computers have complicated lives very greatly. And I was just thinking, just like bigly. I mean, if you read things that way, if you allow him to say bigly, then maybe that's what he's saying. Computers very bigly have complicated lives. When you look at their lives, they're complicated. In the bigliest way. Anyway, it looks like, essentially he's dismissing I think he was just dismissing the hacking claims out of hand, as he usually does. And so, not much there in terms of news. But I also see Brendan Nyhan spending the morning tweeting, I guess out of exasperation, that once again, it appears for all the world as though Donald Trump will enter into office immediately in violation of the Emoluments Clause. I'm not really sure what motivated him to pick that banner up again this morning, or to tweet it in a way that implies that nobody has noticed this. I mean, he's right to a certain extent, and I guess he's just arriving at where we bloggers have lived for the past 10, 15 years, just continuing to label this a tremendous failure on the right and left. Or I think he actually used D and R labels in expressing this. What was it? DR media fail. I don't know whether there's just slashes there. D/R/media. Although, many people were noting to him, I mean, it's not necessarily a media fail. They haven't really done anything. But it's not up to them to remove him from office or block him from entering office. All they can do is sound the alarm. And I'm pretty sure that I know that the president is in violation of the Emoluments Clause because the media has reported it. It's just that they're not spending every day harping on it every minute. But I guess, I suppose that would make a difference. If literally every newspaper in America were just saying, this just can't work, I don't know what you're talking about, you can't put this guy in office, it's just unconstitutional, it would certainly change the atmosphere, but I don't know that it would change the result. I mean, I was thinking about it just a little bit this morning, and I guess we could spend a little bit of time on it. Being that Greg's absent today, and we have no one else scheduled for Thursday. Anybody want to call? You want to just call and chat? I don't know. Armando may have more to say, not just about what we were discussing the other day. There's a few more bits and pieces we could add to the debate about the Electoral College, certainly. But a case like this, the violation of the Emoluments Clause, which at bottom, of course, we all have to realize the Constitution, like most things, is not simply self-executing rules-wise. You've got to actually go and do something about it. People have to take a vote and whatever. I mean, if you have to go on record to say, we have a case against this guy, and I think it warrants removal from office. And, of course, that is expected. I think you're all correct in saying, well, it's a Republican Congress, and he's a Republican. Don't look for that to happen anytime soon. And I would say you're largely correct in that. And you find yourself back on very familiar territory all of a sudden, where a large, well, at least not insignificant segment of the population says, yeah, this is an outrage. It can't be allowed to continue. You've got to do something about it. And interestingly, we'll see whether this is, how could it not be the exact same response? It occurred to me, of course, that, the reality is that people will say this is an immediate violation of the emoluments clause, and the answer is going to be, yeah, well, we don't have the votes. I mean, I've been through it. Believe me. I mean, we did this dance with George W. Bush, although I guess you could certainly argue that the case wasn't quite as obvious in that, I don't know. I suppose that there was more room for, or we were more used to seeing wiggle room and interpretation in, for instance, the interpretation of the Fourth Amendment or the prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, depending on what reason you might have had for saying that there was at least a case for looking at the impeachment of George W. Bush, whether it was warrantless surveillance that bothered you the most, or detainee policy and the institution of torture as a policy. Either one of those things. I guess that was an early taste, in a way, also about of the power of the accusation of fake news, or we weren't using that term at the time, but we were disguising it in other ways and having a one-off argument about that. The admonition against the implementation of a torture policy, which was just responded to with a flat denial that what we were talking about was torture. It's enhanced interrogation. I mean, okay, these aren't emoluments. They're, I don't know what. They're, tips. They're voting with dollars. Sure, they're voting with dollars from outside the United States, but money is speech, and we don't prohibit speech in this country, unless, of course, you're doing the speaking, in which case it's prohibited. You see, we went through this already. But I guess I'll remind everybody, heading into the 115th Congress, that if you think that the president-elect, and then later President Trump, is, in fact, in direct violation of the Emoluments Clause, and therefore ineligible for service and ought to be removed from the presidency, you can remind your member of Congress or any Democratic member of Congress, if you think that Democrats would be the only ones inclined to see this, or perhaps you think your Republican member of Congress might one day be inclined to see this. And I suppose it's always possible. Donald Trump excels at making people angry with him and irritating them and crossing them. So I suppose that at some point it's possible that he will cross enough Republicans that, at the very least, that there would be some bipartisan score for at least an informal poll on whether or not an impeachment procedure ought to go forward. Votes will change when it becomes an actual vote on the floor of Congress, should it get to that. But at any rate, that's a long way off. But I will remind you that it is within the power of any member of Congress, any sitting member of Congress, to interrupt the proceedings at almost any time, although they'll have to wait for an answer, but to move impeachment, to take the well of the House on a matter of constitutional privilege. It's one of the more highly privileged, and I don't think that they actually call it a constitutional privilege, but as you can make a privileged motion, and I don't know if they have its own category, but we certainly researched this enough during the Bush administration. Any member of the House can take the well and essentially propose that impeachment proceedings begin. Now, that doesn't mean they start on the spot. You don't even get an answer on the spot. A rank-and-file member of the House standing and saying the president ought to be impeached results in a recognition. Well, you have to get a ruling on whether or not the member is presenting properly a recognizable point of order here. But the chair has the discretion to delay ruling on the proposal for up to, I think, 24 hours, up to a day. But then at some point there has to be, you're able to secure time for a 1 hour, it's not a huge amount of time, but a 1 hour floor debate. I guess I'll put that in pocket and remember that this is something that people can do not only at any time, but it does, in fact, disrupt floor proceedings. One of the things that really made it a great difficulty with the Bush effort was, of course, there were legitimately mixed feelings on the Democratic side early on, anyway, with respect to whether or not the things that George W. Bush did that were arguably in violation of the Constitution were done in service of I guess you can put it in scare quotes, a wartime effort that still had considerable Democratic support, or at least at that point there were considerable numbers of Democrats who either still supported the war effort or hadn't come around to reconciling themselves with the mistake that they had made. And of course, they were holding out hope at that point of retaking Congress. And I guess that's no different than now. Certainly we continue to hold out hope that we might take back a majority in Congress. So that'll make for an interesting political conflict too, right? As they seek to put forward an image of the National Democratic Party that will regain them the majority, there will be Democratic leaders weighing the value of opposition to Trump and how far that opposition ought to go in order to marshal the electoral forces to retake the majority. And there will be arguments made, I have no doubt, on the one hand by progressives, most likely, that the stronger and clearer and I don't even know what other adjectives to hang on it. The stronger and clearer the opposition to Trump, the greater the focus and the greater the chances that they'll find a majority among the electorate. After all, Trump is enormously unpopular. Certainly as far as incoming presidents go, I imagine he has to be considered the most unpopular. Although, well, if you still trust polls, and I know it's difficult to do, that's what the data says. On the other hand, there will almost certainly be arguments against this and say, well, what we really need to do is find a way to sidle up to this. And it can't be opposition to Trump at every turn or opposition to Trump based on personalities. It needs to be based in a strong constitutional claim. And sure, the emoluments clause is you would think an ironclad claim. They will instead, of course, say, well, many of his voters validated his complicated financial structure. It was why they voted for him. We need to find some other way. We can oppose him on policy grounds, but we can't be seen advocating for the kind of upheaval that comes with removing the president from office. Why not? I don't know. The theory, of course, will be, overturning election results is just too radical or would be seen as somehow illegitimate. It's hard to even come up with these kinds of explanations, but, it's almost certain to be what anybody who advocates for removal from office, whether temporary under the 25th Amendment, like we discussed a little bit yesterday, or permanent under impeachment, there's no doubting that it is upheaval, and that Americans don't tend to like upheaval a whole lot. On the other hand, or I guess we could say the other hand, what might you use to push? You might as well start thinking about this now. What might you use to push back against the pushback from what I imagine will be the more conservative Democrats who are, or Democrats who are in either marginal electoral districts or maybe even somehow still surviving in red districts. I don't even know what kind of list we have left of people that fit that category, but certainly more conservatively oriented Democrats who will say, those who would push back against the idea of removal of President Trump from office would almost certainly say that we have the pulse, we got a finger on the pulse of where the center right of America really is, and they're of course still arguing that America is a center right country, despite the lack of actual evidence of that. But on the other hand, they survive in office, so they think the formula is working for them. So they'll be pushing back. I suppose, now this is interesting. I picked this article up not so much with a view towards validating it as towards possibly refuting it, but I wonder if it might actually come in handy for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. This is the piece I'm talking about. Over in, what do you know? It's in The Hill. My goodness, they're doing a great job. Joe Concha noting the action taking place elsewhere in the media world. The comments of Sam Stein from over at the Huffington Post, I guess it looks like he was on MSNBC, and made the comment that ended up in the banner headline here. Huffington Post, or HuffPo, as they like to say in headlines, HuffPo political editor, Obama presided over, quote, destruction of Dems. And that, I'm sure, raised a lot of hackles. But, let's take a look at the article, and then I'll tell you what I was thinking about it. The Huffington Post's senior politics editor, Sam Stein, says President Obama oversaw, quote, the destruction of the Democratic Party, unquote. Which, by the way, that's quite a twist, given that, what's it been, maybe 2 months since we were talking about the election results probably signifying the destruction of the Republican Party. That's got to have them laughing on the other side, don't you think? So he has overseen the destruction of the Democratic Party, leaving it, quote, in a much worse position, unquote, than before his presidency started. And I saw people pushing back on it, and what are you talking about? And he's not the only Democratic leader, and Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, and if it wasn't for gerrymandering, et cetera, and all of this is true and valid and worth saying, though I would say probably only by way of validating the arguments against the institutional barriers we face to retaking power, like gerrymandering, et cetera. But I guess he's looking at results, and it's hard to argue with the ones he highlights. You look at the destruction of the Democratic Party under Barack Obama's leadership, and you have to wonder, what was the political, and I guess he shifts gears here just mentally. What was the political, what were the electoral benefits that he gave to the party? Stein asked on MSNBC's Morning Joe on Wednesday, which you should never go on, but okay, he's in a different role than we are. Anyway, he leaves them in a much worse position, Stein continued. The states are decimated. They lost control of the House and Senate. The governorships are decimated. Again, we noted yesterday, of course, that it was purported anyway that the facts were that the last 5 presidents have left Congress in opposition control. So it's not terribly different from any other president, but it's true here. I think we have the added layer of what's happening in the states, and that's enormously important. Although, for whatever reason, Democrats just don't seem to be very keenly focused on state and local level elections. They don't grab the attention the way the national elections do. But our national politicians do come up through the state system, and of course the state. You may have noticed in our system, the states control an awful lot of what happens in people's daily lives and can stand in the way of a tremendous amount of important progress, like they did with the Affordable Care Act and Medicare expansion and the like. But the truth of the matter is we are rather decimated in the state legislatures. Stein goes on to point out Republicans, of course, control both chambers of the Congress, and Trump will take office on January 20th. The GOP will also hold the governor's office in 33 states starting in 2017, the most in 24 years. And Republicans control both chambers in 32 state legislatures, while Democrats have control of both chambers in only California, Delaware, Hawaii, Oregon, and Rhode Island. Democrats had control of Congress when Obama was elected, but lost the House in 2010 and the Senate in 2014. The party made slight gains in both chambers in this year's elections, but not enough to overcome Republican majorities. So yeah, there's definitely that gerrymandering problem that keeps it out of reach, at least for the time being, taking back the majority. And for how many years? This gets back to the apportionment problems that Armando was highlighting yesterday, but it has the same roots that that Democrats overwhelmingly tend to win overwhelmingly the popular vote nationally for members of Congress. That is, more ballots by far are cast in favor of Democratic members of the House and Senate than you would, than for Republicans, and then you would think. Of course, that would lead to a majority in at least one of the two houses, but in fact it ends up leading to a minority in both, is an apportionment problem in the House, and probably an overrepresentation problem in the Senate. But I guess, again, there's nothing much you can do about that, absent a constitutional amendment. That was clearly part of the design and clearly a concession to the smaller states. But speaking of constitutional amendments, I guess we ought to point out again, I think we pointed this out when it was originally raised a few weeks ago, the danger of the high number of 30-plus states with Republican governors and Republican legislatures dominating both houses. Although, I guess I don't think the governors really enter into this situation now that I think about it. I mean, people like to measure the trifecta, as they call it, because it's just that much more stunning. And of course, for state legislation, having the trifecta makes a tremendous difference. You want I guess, if you're a Republican, certainly, if you would want the legislation passed by the state legislature to be signed by a Republican governor. But I don't think that I'm pretty sure governors probably would not have, I don't know. I mean, it's been such a long time since there was active voting on a constitutional amendment, but I am not certain that a governor's signature would be necessary for a ratification vote. Anybody have that information offhand? I'd have to check that one out. But I think probably it's just a matter of a resolution adopted by both chambers, except for in Nebraska, where they have only one, of the state legislature. And I don't know that there's anything a governor can do to validate or veto a resolution. It certainly wouldn't work that way on the federal level. The president would have, has no role in validating your basic resolutions, unless they are joint resolutions, which are, of course, meant, there is a type of resolution, the joint resolution in Congress, meant to have the effect of law and therefore makes its way to the president's desk for signature or for veto. But I'm not certain that the design of the Constitution necessarily contemplates a role for the governors in that. And I guess the answer would be in the final couple of articles that deal with amending the Constitution, although I don't know how it's been implemented in practice. But let's see. The Article 5, of course, deals with the amendment process. The Congress has their role in it. Whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention, dangerous thing to do, for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid as to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions of 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. So that's interesting. Could the Congress then dictate what? Are we talking about them dictating what procedure would be used? I don't know whether that's the case. It's been a long time since we sent a new constitutional amendment forward for ratification, so I haven't observed the process, really. At any rate, it doesn't read to me, I mean, if you take this literally, that it should be ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, I could imagine the argument being, well, it doesn't mention the approval of the governors. Okay. Let's see. Armando asking if he can bring out a topic from out of left field. Yes, I would think so. I mean, I'm I'm wandering around in left field at this point anyway. But certainly you can go ahead and do that. In the meantime, I'll continue on with the Hill article. Just he winds it up, Stein does, with the comments, maybe Obama is a gifted candidate. He won election twice by substantial margins, but his legacy as a politician is a bit muddied by all that. And yeah, I suppose when you're talking legacy, you have to take note of the fact that, the the state of the National Party is certainly diminished, and its presence in the states certainly diminished. And I guess with a loon like Trump at the helm and the equally loony Republicans who'll be populating Congress, you gotta keep a close eye on the fact that 33 states have legislatures in the same hands. If they're as loony in the states, and by all indications they're usually loonier in the state legislatures than they are in the Congress, if you can imagine that, 33 states, you might be looking at a rubber stamp of just the most ridiculous, insane, anti-democratic, large D or small, constitutional amendments that you could possibly imagine. And every time Donald Trump runs into one of those situations where, oh, you can't do that, that's totally unconstitutional, will he be tempted to say, I'm pretty sure that I could pretty quickly get 33 states to immediately agree that, no, it isn't. Not anymore, anyway. And poof, all of your civics training from 8th grade forward, or whenever you took it, is stood on its head. All those things that you thought were unconstitutional are constitutional now. Because, and think about some of the state legislatures and the state legislators you've read about, Republican ones in particular, around the states. I mean, honestly, these are the guys not ready for prime time on the national level. Dangerous prospect. All right, Armando does join us and ready to bring us another topic out of left field.
Yeah, I mean, it's not completely out of left field. You're talking about the Constitution and what's now going to be constitutional, what's not. I thought the way to underline your point is that you remember that whole I'm just a bill, I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill?
Sure.
Well, they're going to have to redo that video, right?
At some point, sure.
Yeah.
You'll have to put hair on that bill.
But here's a different thought. And it's more than just the moment. I think it's a question of reflection of the country. Maybe that this was the conservative point when they were pushing it. I've always argued that the Constitution permitted for a national government. It certainly created powers. I won't bore everybody to death, but if you read from Marbury Madison through McCulloch v. Maryland, and all the Commerce Clause cases and whatnot, I think it's pretty clear the Federalists thought that we had a strong national government. The other side probably didn't agree, and that really wasn't settled finally, at least in theory finally, in the Civil War, which another outgrowth to the Civil War is it's no longer constitutional to secede.
Yes.
If you secede and you win the war, who cares if it's constitutional? But at least the argument now is a matter of constitutional law, you can't secede. So we talk about blue states seceding, and then there was always talk about Texas seceding, which I guess we probably don't want to do right now.
Now they're talking about California.
Yes, now it's California, which actually is where I come in.
Oh, okay. Great. All right.
I'm not for secession anyway, but because, things change.
Sure.
But I am for thinking, because I think it's real in a way that, with all the things we talked about yesterday about the Electoral College and the Senate, there's this structure that gives the federal government power via states as opposed to the people. And we've talked about the problems not just of gerrymandering, but just simple counting up the numbers, with the number of representatives in the House. And I, just to remind who might not have listened, yesterday I brought the example of the projection that Rhode Island will lose a representative, bringing it down to Wyoming's level, even though it has twice as many people.
Right.
So we've got now what you called, we're turning the House into the Senate,
right?
Which is a body that is reflective of state level control of the federal government. We have an electoral college that also reflects this state level control of the federal government. And if the House becomes that as well, frankly, there's, I think, a real possibility that you're going to create a government that's basically permanent minority of the people.
Yeah.
The people did the math, and I don't know how fair it is, but the more people voted for Democrats to be in the Senate nationwide, obviously more people voted for a Democrat to be the president of the United States nationwide. And our national government doesn't respect those results. That's, to me, that's a constitutional crisis in my mind.
Right.
I really do think that if this becomes a permanent thing where the person who loses the popular vote, or the party that loses the popular vote on a national level, controls the national government, then what are we doing?
I do not know.
Right, so you'll go back and you think about, let me see if I can get to where I'm going. You look at the structure, and it was in all the compromises that were included to protect the small states, right?
Right.
Because, we can't have them telling us everything to do.
Right.
Well, now it's the reverse. Now it's the states are telling the people what to do. The states, qua states, as they would say in their court cases,
yes,
are telling the people what to do. I think that basically challenges the idea of what we are as a national government. And I think it really then requires almost a return to, or not even a return, an adoption of this notion of a weak federal government, to wit, federalism, but for progressives this time.
Yeah.
Think about, you mentioned California.
Right.
California is basically a overwhelmingly majority control Democrat. I think they have veto-proof everything now.
Yes.
Democrats fully run California. And the national election in 2016 also reflected that choice. Trump got beat by 32 points or whatever. Republicans lost everywhere, and so on and so forth. So why was Washington going to tell California what to do? Sounds familiar, this argument, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, before I didn't buy into it because the national government was more representative of the nation than it is now.
That's true. I mean, yeah, you'll immediately be accused of hypocrisy, but yeah, you're right. It's a different situation.
Look, I mean, I put it this way. If the President of the United States can lose the popular vote by 2 to 3 points and claim a historic landslide, then we're not a nation per se. I mean, we have a system that decided that we're just a collection of states. Then if we're just a collection of states, then let's act like it. That's federalism.
Mm-hmm.
If we're not a national people, we're rather a collection of states, then let's act like it. Then there should be a weak federal government, and there should be strong state governments.
I suppose so. I mean, every time you mention that, just being a collection of states, I'm reminded, for instance, I don't know, for some reason, one of the things that really stuck with me from the teaching of the history of from the colonial period through the constitutional framing was that the Constitution was initially ratified purposefully through newly elected and newly convened state conventions, and that they purposely avoided asking the state legislatures to do the ratifying. Although, certainly amendments these days are ratified by legislatures.
Well, actually repeat that for me. When you're saying that the states, they avoided having legislatures ratify, they went directly to the people of the states? Or was it in essence referendums in each state for it?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they had those? I'm sorry, what?
Organized the referendums.
That's a tough question to actually answer. I mean, it's they were state conventions is the vehicle that they use rather than referenda. I mean, I don't think referenda made any sense to. That's
interesting, right? State convention. So somebody declared, "I'm holding the state convention." So how did they get to do
They were elected bodies, as I recall. But I mean, what a weird situation that must have been, right? I mean, I don't know. The whole thing is really quite complex.
A little murky, right? Somebody just declared, "Hey, we had an election.
I mean,
you were elected. You're elected."
There was no authorization on. It was a coup against the Articles of Confederation. It's just, I guess, enough people thought that they were so horrible that nobody did anything. And of course, they were a little bit war weary, perhaps, and not really ready to take up arms against the leaders of their own prior revolution. But yeah, the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, even that was something that honestly, there's no basis in law for it. It would have been an otherwise illegal assembly.
We get all so technical. Well, wait a second. Where does this come? Wait a second. Where did those guys in Philadelphia come?
I mean, every time somebody points to,
they get to have a convention.
This is enshrined in the Constitution. Oh, you mean the manifesto from the terrorists who hold up in the building in Philadelphia?
Basically a Port Huron statement. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Bunch of cranks.
You remember all the public and press access to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia? Oh, the secret one? The one they locked the doors? Yeah, but the people inside were heroes, Oh, they are now. Oh, they're the framers. They're the founders. At the time,
the funny part is, of course, is the Constitution itself was constitutional hardball.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I mean, it was easy to play as against the Articles of Confederation because should we send the cops? I don't know. Do we all agree? No.
Should we send the cops? Of course, the problem being the Articles of Confederation had no cops to send.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's all have a meeting and decide whether or not to appropriate funds for cops. I don't know. I have a thing today. Well, it's not unanimous.
No, I have veto power. All it took was one.
Right.
One state says no. Well, we can't do it.
I have to wash my wig. I can't make it.
It was indeed a suicide pact, the Articles of Confederation.
Yeah, so the Constitution, as you know, isn't. So
right.
It's been said. Someone just once said it wasn't, so that's it. But yeah, it was an extra legal convention, and I always thought it was interesting to look, by the way, at the names, the composition of the Continental Congress, as they called it, all the way up through the Articles of Confederation, and see who's sitting in Congress, and then see who shows up at the Constitutional Convention, and then take a look at the roles of the first Congress as constituted under the new Constitution. And it's like, well, these guys are in charge of running the country. Then Set B has a constitutional convention, redraws the whole thing and says we're going to constitute Congress entirely differently from now on. And then all of a sudden the roles of Congress are filled with Set B, the guys who went to the Constitutional Convention, for the most part. Very few people survived from the Continental Congress over to the Constitutional Congress. They really changed gears there. And we say, look at the roles of the first Congress, why it's filled with our founders and our heroes of the Republic. Mm-hmm. It's filled with guys who wrote their own ticket, is what it was. But okay.
I'm a founder.
We
Listen to me.
Yeah. Well, right. And like you said, like secession's constitutionality goes the other way if you win the war. And if you win the first federal elections, the legality of your constitution goes the other way too. Ooh, you're a hero. Or we're sending you to jail. I don't know. We'll see.
Or you're a traitor. Yeah. I mean, that's obviously an old story. Certainly, we all remember it from which Roman nobleman became emperor, which one got killed.
Yeah.
And the only rhyme or reason was whose army won. So those are the realities of it. But what does it mean in practical terms, what I'm talking about here?
I don't know.
Let me try to translate.
Okay. Yes.
Since the conception of a national government, I don't think, maybe it did, but certainly it's not our current conception of it. Didn't imagine that the national government would be run by a minority of the people.
Certainly not on a sustained basis.
I would argue not even once. I don't think this was contemplated this way, and it certainly isn't our conception of it. And I said, listen, this is now 2 elections in 4 that the popular vote winner didn't win the election. That's 50% of the elections that we've had.
Yes.
Of the last 4.
Another way of putting it would be that 100% of the last 4 elections were won by, I guess, not of all the elections.
100% of the elections were won by Democrats.
4 out of 5.
But we only won them.
Yeah, I mean,
for
I guess
constitutional purposes half the time.
George Bush's second election, I assume he won the.
He won by 2.4%.
Yeah. All right, so 4.
Ironically, 80,000 votes switch in Ohio that year, and Kerry would have been the president as a loser of the popular vote.
Oh yes, right.
We came very close to having 3 of 4 popular vote losers become president.
Well, as we now know, in hindsight, the Republicans would have accepted that outcome.
Yeah, well, obviously they wouldn't have, and they were. I mean, except. I don't know. We've never been in that scenario where it's the Republicans,
right,
who do these things. So we don't know. We know that Democrats are wusses and won't do anything. That's just, we'll tweet about it and we'll do that, but the actual people won't do anything. And maybe that's to their credit. I mean, maybe they're right and we're wrong. Maybe it takes somebody to be more responsible. But what happens is when the other people aren't responsible, then you're being irresponsible to your own constituencies.
Yes.
All right. So look at it this way. What am I saying? I'm saying there is an argument that has been championed for years by conservatives and Republicans. It's not an unprincipled argument, but it's wrong as a matter of constitutional law, and it's just wrong as policy. A national government should be the main governing voice of a nation. If it's a nation. If it's not a nation, well,
right,
then it's a series of treaties among sovereign states. The whole 10th Amendment federalism arguments of the Republicans and the conservatives has really been based on the idea that each state is sovereign. We're not really a nation. We're 50 states. And somebody, and they said, well, we're only giving remainders. But the problem is, once you open up that concept, all sorts of things are possible. In essence, my argument now is there is more moral justifiability for this argument than there has ever been before, because of the disconnect between the people as a nation, the people of the nation, have lost control of who will run our national government. I'm not exaggerating here, David. I don't think.
I don't think so either. And that statement by itself, I mean, if I dress you up right and send you to a Donald Trump rally and have you say that, you'll get virtually universal agreement from the people at the rally. They think you're talking about lobbyists or moneyed interests or what have you, when you're actually talking about Republican elected officials holding the majority in the national government despite losing the majority among the people. But yeah, the same argument is made. The people have lost control over who governs this nation. Of course, they think that the answer to that is Trump should do it, but it's a common refrain, that's for sure.
Well, I think, it's not a controversial concept. It's not a controversial principle to say that the majority should rule, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's a cornerstone now of every, theoretical.
I think so.
Even of government. No one openly argues for fascism anymore or dictatorship anymore, right?
Well, I mean, certainly people are beginning to do that. But even I was going to evaluate that in terms of the alt-right, the so-called alt-right. But even what's the real heart of their fight? The heart of their fight, as they see it, is to keep America majority white.
Right,
for a number of reasons, but yeah, it is different. But they too. I mean, I guess that inherently.
Oh, I hear what you're getting at. They want to respect majority rules by keeping America majority white.
Right. If it's not majority white,
why do they
we might be
majority
wrong.
White if they don't care about majority rules?
Right. They just like to be around a lot of white people, I'm sure. But I think they're hoping to latch on to the legitimacy of the majority.
And they don't want to. I mean, of course, they have an option. They can do what South Africa did.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it is an option.
Sure. It is definitely an option in the sense that if you don't care about, it's not apartheid because it's not going to be race-based, but we now have a system where minority control of the national government now is at least a 50-50 proposition.
Yes. And so, I mean, so far, we don't have any indication that it would be a race-based thing. But even with the ascendancy of the alt-right, there's still a tiny sliver. But yeah,
of course, in its creation, it is race-based because what's happened is whites have been concentrated in certain states. And
it's also race-based because of when we talk about the way they guarantee themselves the best shot at the outcome they want at the polls is by disallowing and discouraging and suppressing the votes of, and they do it very consciously by race.
No, and that's true, but they're dependent on this state control of the national government. Yes. To do it, because even with all their voter suppression, if we had a national election, which apparently we're not going to have in a nation, they still wouldn't work. They would have lost by 3 million votes.
Yeah.
With all they've done. That goes to show you that the reality of the national electorate is that republicanism has been rejected by the nation, and yet it has total control of our government.
Yes, and total control of 33 of our 50 state governments as well.
Right. I mean, the Democratic Party has won 5 of the last 6 national votes that we've counted all the votes.
and has not been in power for half of that.
Yeah. Hey, that's problematic.
I'm just saying, you know. Yes. I mean, is it a democracy? No, it's a republic. Remember, they keep saying.
Yes. And of course,
now, what does republic actually mean?
Well, I'm losing a grip on that.
When people say that to me, what do you think they mean?
Well, not a direct democracy, obviously. That it's not a popular vote that's responsible for electing our national
government. It's
not
a direct democracy,
right. But representative democracy, supposedly.
Right.
Yeah.
And its most basic point, a republic is, this is from Wikipedia.
Okay.
Form of government in which power resides in elected officials representing the citizen body.
That word representing, we're having trouble
Representing.
with. Yeah.
The citizen body. Okay, so who's the citizen body? How do you represent the citizen body? Do you represent the minority of the citizen body?
Yes. Well, they do.
They do. And yet they have control of the national government. So that answer never made sense to me. I said, well, what do you think that's supposed to mean?
I don't know what they would mean.
What they really mean to say is we are a confederation.
Yes, okay. Although,
indeed, the whole electoral college structure is based on the confederation of the German states in the 1700s, where every little state, no matter how many people lived there, of course, those were monarchies and principalities and dukedoms and things like that. So the whole concept of democracy really wasn't that important to them back then.
Mm-hmm.
But they did talk about, well, you can't just impose your big, on me. I have a vote too. Even if I just have 10 subjects and you have 100, our votes are the same. And that's what they created, and the electors would choose
that's right.
Holy Roman Emperor or whatever the heck they call it.
Yeah, as you were saying it, I remember. Oh, what do you know? They did call themselves electors, didn't they? Yes.
They did. They were electors.
They were prince electors, but okay.
Right. So they had this, and I don't know what the founders were thinking. They came up with this electoral college thing.
To name it the same thing, I think, seems now, in hindsight, a poor choice.
I still don't understand what they were trying to do.
I don't know. Other than, the argument is, and I do have another piece, I don't know what, sort of, I suppose a defense, a last-ditch defense of the electoral college system, but trying to explain, that certainly the traditional explanation has been the preservation of the voice, I guess, is the best word you can put on it, of the smaller states, the less populated states, the less traveled states, as opposed to simply turning over the national government to what has now become the two big bi-coastal focal points of New York and California. Although Texas is sitting down there with a tremendous number of electoral votes too, it's just that usually can't attract that many allies to its cause. But and now we see, of course, the counter. The best thing that they can come up with is, well, if you don't count California and maybe New York too, then it's overwhelming for Republicans. But of course, that makes no real sense. They are, of course, in any confederation, you're still going to have to count them. To have your cake and eat it too, we're going to have a confederacy, but also kick the biggest opposition states out of the count to prove that we're really right here. Are you a confederacy or are you not? Now you don't want to be a direct democracy, so we're going to be a confederacy. We agree to be a confederacy, and then you start trying to discount the votes of member states, the biggest member states of your confederacy, so you can claim there's only one thing that can come from this. It's claiming minority rule.
Yeah.
What would be the purpose of saying, well, if we didn't count this state, even if it was a small state, what would be the point of trying to kick it out of the confederacy? Nothing. I don't know. Just to justify their own. Yeah, it's a rather gimme-tarian view of things, but okay. But yeah, somebody was Robert Schlesinger at U.S. News and World Report offering up what he says is the real defense of the Electoral College. I don't know what it is yet because I haven't read it, but he's summarizing the traditional ones. But the traditional ones are beginning to fail, to really connect us to what's going on here.
It's almost like the argument appears to be. That's how we've always done it. And it was created by the founders, ergo it must be good, which of course we know that that's a pretty weak argument. We had a war because of the founders, the Civil War. We had to redo the way that senators were elected.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, their whole mechanisms of governing have been pretty clunky at best, right?
Yes.
And you ask yourself, why didn't they just do a parliament?
I don't know. I mean, I was going to say they certainly have had some bad experiences with the British Parliament, but why you would then say, well, how about the Holy Roman Empire as a model then?
I like those. The papists are the way to go.
Well, yeah, and interestingly, I mean, I guess by that point they
were Lutheran
largely, yeah. But which is another interesting thing. I mean, I guess again there you look to, should we use that as a model? Well, I don't know. Have they really adapted to the times? I mean, honestly, none of them are loyal to Rome. Why do they continue to call themselves the Holy Roman Empire and Holy Roman electors? There's nothing.
Yeah. Hey, tradition.
Yeah, right. We've always done it that way. Well, okay, that didn't work out very well for them. But what should we do? Well, we should emulate that. I don't know. That's an odd model. I wouldn't have chosen that as and to stick with that as the name. Although I suppose, I don't know. I don't know how you pronounce the translation of Elector of the Holy Roman Empire in German. So maybe people wouldn't have recognized it. But the idea, well, certainly having referred to them in English that way, I don't know. I mean, maybe there just wasn't enough experience with it. The English and the British islands didn't participate in that, and I don't know. Maybe they somehow viewed it as
the opposite.
Yeah, as somehow valuable, or I don't know.
What is it? I mean, maybe it was
for
German stability at the time, but it's not democracy, and it never was intended to be. Again, people who were the electors weren't actually chosen by the people, so I still don't even understand the concept.
I don't know, and I'm not sure why they would have named it after that. It's very odd that they would have chosen that. Although, again, probably at the time they might have said, well, one, we don't have any other name for it, and two, it's not like, are Americans going to say, oh, wait, Electoral College, that's the borrowed from the Holy Roman Empire. That worries me. They would have no idea what this is in most cases. But it's a strange thing to borrow. It would be like if we did redesign Congress, like as you were proposing, to expand.
We have to comply with the Constitution. I'm arguing it's a constitutional imperative.
Yes, but if we were to reorganize and to do that, if we were to rename the institution for some reason as well, and we said, what would be a good name for it? We don't like Parliament. How about Duma? Should we just maybe choose that?
Let's do Duma.
Yeah, I mean, what does that mean? I don't know.
Trump will like it. Maybe we can fool him with it.
Right. It would be similarly troubling. People in the know would say, that's just symbolically a bad idea. I don't have any other name for it. What do you think?
I'll try to convince Trump on this one.
Yeah. Knesset?
He'll ask Putin. Putin likes his Duma, and off we go.
Yeah. We'll try that. It's just a name. Don't worry about it. I'm not certain why they chose that one.
The name, obviously, is funny, and because it actually goes to why people make these choices. Why was the choice of why did the Constitution, in theory, create this three so-called co-equal branches? It comes from their conception, I guess. You tell me, of what they thought the British system was. The problem being the president in that system is the king, the head of state. And the king, even at the time of the revolution, was fairly limited in power. If that was the conception, we shouldn't have a strong president at all.
And, I mean, certainly there's the argument that the original founding design, the president wasn't that strong.
But now we accept that he is. So what do we do then?
I don't know. I mean,
here's what we do.
Because we liked it.
Here's what we do. We abolish the Electoral College and we put it to a national popular vote.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if we were all honest, and I mean everybody, the concept of what the president has become, he is the national office holder. The only national office holder. The only office in the country that every American votes on. Correct?
Yes.
So we've turned that into the national referendum. It should be put to a national popular vote. I mean, that's the reality. You could keep every other federalism piece that you like, the Senate, you can even screw up the House, you can empower the 10th Amendment, but the presidency is a national office. It's the only national office. And yet it is the one that doesn't abide by the results of the majority of the nation.
True.
That's just fundamentally wrong.
It's certainly problematic. It's causing an enormous problem right now. And it has for the last, as you point out, 4 of the last 5 elections, which I think would probably indicate a pretty serious problem. If we were if this had happened in the era during which the founders were still living, I imagine this would be the sort of thing that they would say, this needs some tinkering. We have screwed this up.
The Constitution was amended to call for, not just provide and allow, requires direct election of senators.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, there's no other reason other than the desire to cling to the validity of the power of the majority.
That's interesting. I believe it came up, or correct me if I'm wrong, David, wasn't this a progressive thing from the early 1900s?
I would guess that you're right. I mean, certainly...
Let me just double check it, because I think it's an important point to think that because it's counter to everything. When the Senate itself is created for state representation. That's the reality. I mean, that's why we have it.
And that's
why each of them have 2. That's the design.
And
I think it's a ridiculous design, but that...
Yeah, that would probably be the reason why senators were originally not directly elected. There was a body of people elected by the people directly and for the purpose of representing to the people as in political bodies not based in states per se, but these amorphous congressional districts which could actually change, and then another body of people elected to represent states as states, or like you said, states qua states, but and elected in a manner befitting that at the time, which was that the state would tell you through its its own voice, its own organ, the legislature, who would go. So that made a certain amount of sense. I guess, interestingly, the progressive, or certainly progressive-themed reform of direct election of senators, probably, I'm sure the argument was made at the time, it just didn't overcome the desire to have a more direct voice in things as voting people. It probably just didn't make a great deal of sense. This is the body that's supposed to represent states and be controlled by states, and the only voice a state can speak with is an elected body of its legislatures. That's why they appoint senators. It just doesn't, certainly now in hindsight, doesn't feel like, well, I get the point, but it's anti-democratic.
It is anti-democratic, and it's not choosing the people. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you think the 17th Amendment, if you believe that direct election of senators on a state level makes sense, how can you not support it for the presidency, which is a true national office?
Yeah.
I'm of the view that the 17th Amendment isn't quite as necessary as everybody says. It first, because of the following. Oh. It is an office of the state. You represent the state of, not the people of. At least that was the conception of it. And to make it a direct election of those people is to say, well, you're not representing the state qua state anymore. Yeah. You're representing the people of that state.
Yeah. Now,
so if you believe in that, how can you not be for the president being elected?
Well, yeah, and it's important that you follow on with that quickly, because I will tell you that I know that I have seen conservatives and others, I don't know whether the alt-right, how they would position themselves on these things, but who have proposed in the past, we ought to repeal the 17th Amendment. And I think it was largely motivated by the fact that, where we started the conversation, that there are 33 states where the legislatures are controlled entirely by Republicans, and they just figured that this is something they talked about typically during the last couple of years of the remaining Democratic majority in the Senate. They felt, well, according to the original design, there would be an overwhelming Republican majority in the Senate, and we'd rather have that, so we should be talking about repealing the 17th Amendment so that we would get the majority in the Senate.
I would actually trade them. If they agreed to direct elections of the president, I would let them go repeal the 17th Amendment. I'd do that deal as a progressive.
Well,
who can I go make that deal with and call my own convention and just declare myself a founder?
Sure, you could do that. The risk, of course, is ending up on the eternal national S list instead of the heroes and founders list. But yeah, well, it's an interesting trade, certainly. And what makes it interesting, actually, or what I think an interesting answer to your question, how can you argue for the direct election of senators and stop there and not have argued for the direct election for the president? I wonder whether the early debates on the question included that, and two, whether... No? Okay.
I actually looked at an article that, if it's accurate, sort of gives you the picture. The feeling was that the process at the state level, it was very much the progressive reformers of the 1912. The 17th Amendment was in 1914, I believe. It finally became
see, now, also importantly, this would be a debate taking place in the context of the push for the first cloture rule.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. The World War I era debates over entry into the war and how the United States ought to participate in the war either without entering it or whether or not it should enter it. There was a lot of debate over Wilson's policies, and they were largely filibustered in the Senate, and there was no cloture rule at the time. And the adoption of the first cloture rule comes in like 1917, and shortly thereafter, participation in the First World War as well. So it's the same era, and I'm sure that part of the thinking was, we would not be in the same position. We would have settled these questions over whether or not there can be even something as simple as narrow a question as whether or not there can be cloture would be a different settlement if the people had a voice in the direct election of their senators. But instead, there are these unaccountable appointees of state legislatures, and they end up frustrating the national purpose by filibustering the policy platform of the president because they're untouchable. And so, two of the reforms that they push through is, one, you can close down senators, at least if you can get a overwhelming majority of them to agree to do so, and two, you will have a say in who your senators are. Why they didn't push on and say, P.S. It doesn't make any sense to continue to elect the president this way. I mean, it may have been, well, we're doing fine. There's a Democrat in office right now. It could have been as simple as that.
Yeah.
Or it could have been as simple as, well, I understand your point. It makes sense. We ought to be directly electing the president as well. But what's the problem, really? Because look at how rare it is for there to be a disparity between the popular vote and the electoral vote. And that stands to reason. If you win lots of votes, you're going to win lots of states. And if you win lots of states, you'll win the electoral vote. No problem. Sure, we had that issue in 1801, but they solved that. And we had another issue not that long ago, but we worked that one out too. And
I mean, that's the weird thing, is it didn't work out very well. 1876, of course, was one of them. Mm-hmm. And I believe Grover Cleveland won the popular vote and lost the Electoral College in 1888 or 1892. But the reality is it was a problem then. Maybe it was just too much to take on, or they just didn't think about it. I don't know.
Yeah. By 1917, well, of course, we had other problems at that point, and they may simply have said, well, I think we've got the votes to put it together on direct election of senators, and maybe we're biting off more than we can chew if we do the president at the same time. Although, honestly, it was like, well, the logic is unassailable. You might as well go for it. But I suppose it's possible that they might have thought we will end up on the short end of the stick with that, or I don't know. I'd love to know why they didn't include it. If it's that they just didn't think of it, that's an astounding failure.
Ironically, it's Democrats who always come up short on these things.
Yes.
Because Tilden won by 3 percentage points in theory, but the popular vote, again, this is right after the Civil War, so it's, no Republicans were losing 100-0 in the South.
Yes.
So I don't know if they thought of that as, I don't know what they thought of it at that point. And then, of course, it repeats itself in the Cleveland-Benjamin Harrison race. And again, maybe the Civil War was just so overarching that nobody was thinking in those terms. But now, but the concept is the same. We need the people to decide, not the back rooms. Well, that requires elections, of course, but it basically encompasses the idea that a vote of the majority is where the government gets its legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a majority of some cockamamie thing called an electoral college.
Yeah.
That is already problematic because of the way it's created. It already is anti-democratic in its construct because it encompasses the concept of the Senate.
Yeah.
If they just stuck to the House, then it's just a little plaything. It doesn't, at least then it's just, well, each state gets this many votes, ergo, it's less problematic. But when they include the Senate in the Electoral College numbers,
mm-hmm.
Then they really ripped it.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's probably just a remnant of what it took to get the votes together to ratify a constitution.
I wonder if they even thought about it that much.
They certainly thought about a number of other things. I mean, the teaching has.
There isn't that much writing on the adoption of the Electoral College.
That's true. Not much of the discussion about that. So it's tough because the teaching is always that. It's typically about the composition of Congress and that there was this great compromise and that the genius of bicameralism, that all gets lots of discussion, but the structure of the Electoral College doesn't. But I mean, since it's the same design, I assume that if there was any discussion at all, they just said, well, you just validated the design of Congress as this great stroke of genius. I'm designing the Electoral College the same way. How could that be any less genius? I'm tired. I suppose you have a point. It's hot. Yes.
It's definitely it's hot. Makes good sense.
It's a big deal in Philadelphia in those days. The suit, the wig, I'm dying. You're right. I liked it 10 minutes ago. I don't like the name so much, but okay.
Listen, I honestly think they didn't think that much about it, because if you stop and think about it, there was no need for a, quote, electoral college.
Mm-hmm.
States could just say, we chose so-and-so, cast our 13 votes for whoever.
Yeah. It's just a point system. Certainly don't need to be any people involved in it. That's one thing.
Just report your results and say, we choose him.
Yes. I mean, they just had that happen, and everybody insisted that in order to be legitimate, you absolutely have to simply show up and tell us again what the results were.
Yeah, we don't believe in the postal service. We need you to come and tell us in person.
Right. After which we'll mail what you say to Washington. Because after all, we're not crazy. But
that's what I'm saying. It's just not. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. Someone said, "Hey, what would be cool if we had this thing called electoral college?" All right, what the hell?
Yeah. Then maybe there was one admirer of the Holy Roman Empire in the
exactly.
convention.
Who knows? Somebody liked this whole, there was some papist who liked the way the College of Cardinals did it.
Yes.
It's crazy. That part of it for sure. And the second, but I still question. You said. I think your answer is probably correct. They didn't think about it because there's no reason to make the Electoral College include the Senate and the House.
Yeah.
For its numbers. Why not just have the House?
Yeah, I don't know. And certainly, if they had an argument about it, they could have said, well, that the Congress is going to be the great compromise. That's one branch. The third branch, the judiciary, is going to be appointed. So, fine, whatever. They have that model in there, too. Why wouldn't we have one branch is directly elected, one branch is appointed by the guy who gets directly elected, and then ratified by the Congress, which is a mixture of both. If they had stopped to think about it, I think it would have made a great deal of sense. One popular election, one the other extreme appointment, and in the middle, half is one and half's the other. There. Settled.
All right, so that means when we did the 17th Amendment, we should have backed out the Senate part of that. But I still think it's problematic. And listen, it's not nothing. The Trump won 30 states, and Republicans generally win more numerically states than Democrats. So
you get those red maps.
There is, and 10 states is times 2. That's 20 electoral votes. Of the advantage, just on that quirk,
right?
And don't tell me it's not a quirk, that it has some real meaning.
Yeah. Only as part of the compromise, but why the compromise's effects should spread beyond the body you built to embody that compromise, I don't know. I don't understand why it should be
I'll go more
anywhere else.
I'll revisit the impetus behind the 17th Amendment is, we believe in people voting. This is the one national office in the country, the one office where everybody has the same president. Everybody has different senators and different representatives and different whatevers. But we have one president that is president of everybody.
Yeah.
So we take the most undemocratic way of choosing them.
How about this? Instead of repealing the 17th Amendment, how about we give electoral votes to every county in every state and say you got to elect your senators that way, by county. And everybody gets 2 bonus points for the county. I wonder what that would do. Nothing, probably. But
you can do it by congressional district. But remember, states are free to say we're going to allocate, and they do, Maine and Nebraska do. Allocate by congressional district.
True, and I guess more of them
they could every state could say, let's say somebody proposes, just hypothetically, that our state's going to vote for the popular vote winner.
Yeah. I mean, there is that compact that's hanging out there too.
Exactly.
I guess that's true. And I guess maybe that's the out that they use is they say, well, sure, it doesn't make any damn sense the way the electoral votes are allocated by the states right now. But I don't know what else to say other than, well, I guess your states are lazy, and that's your fault.
States are lazy. Yeah, it's the argument for having it. Well, I'm glad you put all the responsibility in their hands then. Good job.
Yeah, well, it was a mistake in hindsight, but at least 2 or 3 states have figured out what the mistake was and reevaluated. You're just not getting results out of the legislatures you're electing, and maybe you're happy with it because it's going your way. Or at least,
you know how you're familiar probably with Rawls's theory of justice, and he always creates the blind observer for deciding what they think is fair. And in politics, there are no blind observers. So now what happens is you pick solutions, and you said this about the Supreme Court yesterday, and you're right. Well, does this help my side? Well, then I'm for it.
Yeah.
At the very least, it's an important consideration on what they think about this. And that's all of us. I'm not singling out Republicans. I mean, everybody wants a result that's good for their side.
Yes. No, that's true. I mean, I know the Democrats who have scurried to figure out, well, what would the Electoral College have looked like if all of the electoral votes were, in fact, allocated by congressional district. And I believe that the numbers actually come out with a bare 270 for Hillary Clinton, and so therefore, okay, there you go, the result we wanted, and so therefore
it's
a good
right?
idea.
I did not know that. I hadn't heard about that.
Or it's very close, but yeah, the number comes out differently, as I recall, and I didn't really tuck it away because I was sort of like, well, okay, that's nice, but we don't have that. But
well, I'm not even for that either. I think that may help a little bit, but it still doesn't deal with the problem. I believe that if 100% of the people in California voted for Donald Trump, every one of their votes counts.
Yeah.
This is a national vote. Just because it happens to have been cast in California doesn't make it less valuable than a vote cast in Wyoming.
Yeah, there's no getting around that argument of that we're making yesterday, that there's no reason in the world why the vote should, or why there should be more voting power in the Congress for residents of Wyoming than any other state, and similarly, their votes for president shouldn't count anymore. That they get the built-in bonus for their 2 senators doesn't make any sense.
Right. I think that's the synthesis of my objections is just that. I mean, okay, states, you created the Senate. I disagree with it. There it is.
Mm-hmm.
But you created a House that you said was going to be proportionally representative of the people.
Yeah.
Not states, of people.
And it's not.
I mean, there's an argument that congressional districts shouldn't be bound by state boundaries, but that's, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, all right.
No one's going to go for that one.
Yes, well, not likely, given the ratification process anyway. Although I guess if you have a convention, you could try it. But then you'll probably be arriving at the convention in state delegations, so...
Right, but the thing though is but wait, you need to have them contiguous in a state. Fine, okay. The president isn't contiguous in any single state. There is no.
That's true. I am president on both sides of this river, no matter what you say. I mean, unless it's the Rio Grande, I suppose.
Here's where I was trying to go when I first started this my call with you. But okay, let's accept that even the presidency is going to be subject to this federalism concept of states selecting the president.
Okay.
Well, then we have to really go we have to fully accept then the federalism precepts. We need to weaken the national government, and we need to strengthen state governments. California should not be imposed upon by a president who they voted against by 2-1.
Yeah.
On things like climate change, on things like education, on things like whatever. If we are going to not treat ourselves as a nation, then that cuts both ways. And this fellow Trump, who by this crazy states' rights quirks became president, then should be circumscribed in his power by the very same principles. He doesn't get to tell California what to do.
Yeah. I'm looking here at
both these concepts. Hello?
Yeah, I'm pondering what you have to say, and also I'm looking at a comment here, Michael Musson, trying to ponder this one. He's commenting on the conversation. I don't think anyone would agree, he says, with electors proportional to party, yet by state is virtually the same.
Well, because we know the partisan fallout of states, but it's not. It's by the concept is a state is this unit, and whatever partisan control is there, they get the voice. And this is what I'm saying. If I accept that conception, and I don't as a matter of policy, but suppose I did, I have to, then it has to go hand in hand with a president who is hemmed in, circumscribed, a presidency that's circumscribed by those same states' rights arguments. One goes with the other. I don't think it's so. I think the Senate, you could argue, the Senate should only be able to vote on things that don't impact states' power. I think you can make that argument. But the House is elected on a national basis, popular vote. The House is the body that, in theory, has a national mandate. Because it's a series of elections from people. Now, the problem, of course, is, well, if you gerrymander, you win all the 51-49s and lose all the hundreds of zeros, you didn't really win the vote, and that happens. That happens now.
Yeah.
But at least there has to be a voting unit. There has to be a district. I mean, I don't think I can question that. As long as everybody votes. And I guess people say, well, what about the state? I said, yeah, the problem with the state is that's not the voting district for president. The voting district for president is the United States of America. The nation. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting thing. I don't know. I just had a crazy thought as you were talking about there has to be a voting unit, obviously, for the House. And I was just, for some reason, I guess, thrown back to your other comment about, well, the districts have to be contained within and contiguous within the states, because we've decided on that as a federal structure. Although then I got to thinking of, for instance, the Republican proposals for health insurance reform during the Affordable Care Act debates.
State lines.
So you should be able to buy your insurance across state lines. Well, what if we entered into voting co-ops? Each co-op has the same number of people in it and has a cap, but prior to the election, what you need to do is sign up to join a voting co-op. You're registered to vote if you're a member of a voting co-op. All right, well, I may, and the voting co-ops can, I suppose, organize themselves as they see fit. You might say, well, I want to be a part of the co-op that says we aim for 70% Democratic, 30% Republican participation, or we're only Democrats. Or I don't know. I mean, I suppose you would just end up with just simple straight party. I don't know how you could get together and organize your voting co-op with members of the other party. But I just, it's a dumb thought. I can't make it work in any way.
Well, I think it's a commentary on gerrymandering.
I guess, yeah.
Here that the redistricting is in essence the party in power creating co-ops that favor it.
Yeah, I guess that is another way of looking at it, and it's not a question of you would have a very tough time self-organizing in ways with that contemplated a mix of the parties. But so instead, it's just imposed on you by one of the two parties. Well, we have some Democrats in this state.
This discussion on gerrymandering and whatnot, it shows you how unprincipled an asshole the late Justice Scalia was.
Oh, okay.
I can't let an opportunity
okay.
crush him.
He can't
He
answer.
pretended gerrymandering was nothing. It was just, political processes. But federalism, my God, that's one of the sacrosanct, written in blood things that we must protect at all costs. Which makes no sense. If federalism matters, gerrymandering matters.
True.
Either one, you can't, being intellectually consistent, say one matters and the other doesn't.
Yes. Well, that's that's not going to convince him. Of course, well, one, he's dead, but two, it would never have worked even when he was alive with him. But well, it's a good point. If you're going to be dedicated to federalism as sacrosanct, but ignore the effects of gerrymandering inside of the state units, I don't know why that would. It's just one of those things you're used to.
Anyway, that was just an aside and an opportunity to take a dig at one of the most despicable people in American history. I know he's dead. I don't care.
Yeah,
I'm still
it's not going to bother you. I know that. Not really. I think you're safe with the audience.
Okay. Oh, don't.
All right. Well, we've certainly gotten wildly theoretical here, but it makes an important point. I know we're kind of done with the electoral college thing, and we've lost it, and they have yet, of course, to show up and open the envelopes and count the vote. That's a very important thing, apparently. We've lost Armando here, but I guess he probably had to move on to that other call. But on the other hand, I think we may have exhausted that particular topic. I might as well go through the articles I had held in reserve that are related to the topic. The piece in U.S. News and World Report by Robert Schlesinger, the managing editor of the publication, which he titles "The Real Defense of the Electoral College." Why don't we just fill it in? We'll fill out the discussion after the theoretical discussion is all over with some of the punditry and commentary on the subject and see if there's anything salvageable here. Despite what some defenders of the Electoral College seem to think or wish, New York and California are still part of the Union. Their citizens' votes count just as much, I guess they don't really, as those residing in non-coastal states, and accounting for the national popular vote in our presidential elections wouldn't lead to some sort of bi-coastal tyranny. My column last week suggesting a reform to the Electoral College, I don't know exactly what his reform was, but we could take a look afterwards, prompted a number of reader responses I thought were worth addressing. Yesterday I looked at some of the misconceptions surrounding the Founding Fathers' intentions regarding the institution. Oh, maybe we ought to take a look at that, too. Another common thread in reader responses is the idea that the Electoral College is a necessary guard against majority rule. Against majority rule. And that, specific to the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton's popular vote victory is somehow illegitimate because it included California and or New York voters. I don't know how you would stand on that ground, but people did try. A typical complaint from a reader named Andrew, and you know what we say about people named Andrew. Nothing, but maybe we'll start. As you know perfectly well, Andrew says, 4.3 million of Clinton's 2.8 million national plurality came from California. Another reader writes, and we don't bother telling what that reader's name is, we have a federal system that protects most of the country from being ruled by New York City and Southern California, and so on. I suspect that the other reader had a name like Jax 259, I said something that he didn't want to name. Andrew, that's normal. They're still, uncomfortable with crazy bloggy names in national publications. Anyway, these sentiments cut to the nub, he says, of what animates a lot of defenses of the current iteration of the Electoral College, not a high-minded philosophical mistrust of big states or majoritarianism as such a toxic... Oh, okay, we have to reread this and put the emphasis elsewhere. The sentiments cut to the nub, right, of the current defenses of the current iteration of the Electoral College, not a high-minded philosophical mistrust of big states or majoritarianism as such a toxic reverse snobbery that disdains some chunks of the country as being less legitimately American than others. The ostensible idea is that, as big states, New York and California threaten to single-handedly dictate the outcome of the national popular vote, or conversely, that the Electoral College protects small states by augmenting their importance. I should note again that I don't favor simply eliminating the Electoral College, Schlesinger writes, in favor of a straight direct election, but the arguments are much the same either way. Let's see. There are several problems with this view, the first being philosophical. Either you believe in democracy, that is majority rule, put most simply, or you don't. Majority rule needn't mean mob rule. Systems can be constructed to protect minority views and rights, see the Constitution. But much of the argument against accounting for the national popular vote is fundamentally anti-democratic. It is defended as being consistent with the wisdom of the founders. They were leery of straight democracy, the argument goes. And it's true, many of the framers took a dim view of the average voter. But we shouldn't be bound by such anachronistic elitism any more than we should share the founders' view that the ballot should be restricted to white male Protestant property owners. Our politics have progressed in the last couple centuries, and few people would publicly make the serious argument that voters are too stupid to choose their leaders. Although it's becoming increasingly popular. Another really basic problem with this line of argument against the popular vote relates to math. 13.7 million Californians and 7.5 million New Yorkers voted in the general election nationally. Voted in the general election. Nationally, 136.6 million people cast votes. So even if everyone in California and New York voted in lockstep, they couldn't come close to dictating to the rest of the country. To put it in mathematical terms, 115.4 million is greater than the 21.2 million voters in New York and California. So it is a little stupid. I mean, and it does obviously ignore an awful lot of the math. Well, without California, he would have won the popular vote. And that, I guess we were just, there was so much umbrage taken at the ridiculousness of that argument that nobody, I guess, bothered to point out, that still means millions and millions of people are still voting for Hillary Clinton. Even in states that she lost, there's still lots of votes for her there. You can't just drop those. Anyway, but comes the counter-argument, surely candidates would cater to the big cities and big states, in case, I guess, of straight popular vote. One reader writes, I suspect that if our president was elected based on the popular vote, those of us in Kansas would not see many candidate visits and feel less represented than we do currently. Which really, boo-hoo. But anyway, the fact is that under the current system, states like Kansas are already ignored by the candidates. The Sunflower State got nary a post-convention candidate visit at all, making it hard for its voters to feel less represented. But Kansans are in good company. New York didn't get any, according to the group National Popular Vote, and California got only one. The count excludes private fundraising events from its definition of campaign visit, else those figures would be inflated. Interesting. I guess that's really something. Indeed, real life belies the idea that the Electoral College in its current form uniquely empowers small states. It's true that Wyoming's 255,000 voters each got more electoral bang for their votes, that is 85,000 voters for each electoral vote, than did California's 14.2 million voters, where it came down to 257,000 voters per electoral vote. But collectively, they got one general election candidate campaign visit. Big state Florida got more visits, though some those small states, Iowa and New Hampshire, got their share as well. The current system doesn't empower little states over big. It empowers swing over non-swing states. And, I guess if it's not going to be small versus large, that would be your next guess. And it wouldn't take much to get to that guess. Gee whiz, where did they spend all their time? Florida, well, depending on which candidate, right? The big complaint was that Hillary Clinton didn't spend enough time in some of those swing states, but they certainly got lots of attention as between the two candidates, whereas small states really did not. And I don't know why we think that either. Well, you have to pay attention to those small states because they have voting power too. They have electoral votes, yes. But when was the last time anybody went to one of those states with 3 votes in it? And we know that's the case. And we know why they don't go there. Everybody says, well, they only have 3 electoral votes. That's why they don't go there. And yet we turn around every once in a while whenever there's a question about the validity of the Electoral College and say, it protects small states. It makes the candidates pay attention to them because they have a say too. Yeah, they do. They have 3 votes that they don't go. That's very true. It's also important to note, Schlesinger continues, that the Washington Post's Dave Weigel surveyed countries that use a national popular vote to select their president and found that their elections look a lot like our own, with candidates stumping everywhere to drive up favorable turnout and flip voters their way. And closer to home, he noted, just 12 years ago in this country, George W. Bush was wiped out in every urban area outside of Texas and won the presidency and popular vote, his second election. And speaking of the Lone Star State, despite what they say, defenders of the current iteration of the Electoral College don't seem to mind a single large state deciding the election per se, just single large election swinging states that support Democrats, just as we brought up earlier. So the aforementioned Andrew wrote, how democratic is it for one state to elect the president for all 50? The Electoral College was written into the Constitution precisely to prevent such a thing. But, Texas can do it just the same as anybody else. The Electoral College, as he writes, does not prevent that. And in fact, using the reader's logic, in 2016, one state, Texas, elected the president for all 50. If you were to move Texas's 38 electoral votes from Trump's column into Clinton's, she would have won 270. He would have 268. So the issue isn't actually fear of big states per se. After all, Texas is second only to California in population, and New York is only the 4th largest state, lagging behind Florida. Defenders of the current system, so concerned about big states, New York and California, deciding matters for the rest of the nation, are strangely quiescent in the face of big states Texas and Florida actually doing it. Quite true. And when you come down to it, that's really what much of the defense of the Electoral College is about. It goes to the toxic notion most famously voiced by former half-term Alaska Governor Sarah Palin in her national turn, when she made the distinction between real America and, I suppose, fake America. Real America, she said, exists in small towns and little pockets. City dwellers and coastal Americans, by implication, are less authentically American. Their votes can be discounted, and their influence should be checked regardless of, in fact, because of, their numbers. At best, it's a peculiar idea of national identity in a country where 63% of the population resides in cities. At worst, it speaks to a more insidious strain in our politics. It's also important to note that referring to real America is code for the fact that we are talking about a portion of this country that is primarily white. Nancy Letourneau writes at the Washington Monthly, suggesting that is what it means to be real is also code for white supremacy. You could hear it 4 years ago when Republicans dismissed Obama's victory as having stemmed from center cities and urban areas. It was evident in the loathsome Ted Cruz's campaign against New York values during the GOP primary, attacks countered, remembered, by this guy, Donald Trump, of course, being this guy that they link to. You can see it in emails like the one from the Electoral College proponent who decried moronic population centers. You can see it in right-wingers like Matt Drudge touting Donald Trump's popular vote, quote, win outside of New York and California. And you can even hear it in the words of ordinarily sober people like Charlie Cook, who recently talked about how Democrats have lost touch with, quote, real America. And look, it's absolutely true that progressives who live in big cities, and he notes, I grew up in New York and now reside in Washington, D.C., in the metro area anyway, need to remember that this is a big, diverse country where people often have sharply differing views on issues like guns, gay marriage, taxes, and so on. But that truism cuts both ways. People who reside in the so-called heartland need to remember that this is a big, diverse country where people have often sharply differing views, and no one geographic region or demographic group has a monopoly on authentic Americanism. Obviously, the conclusion, a simple one to agree with, but always worth reminding everybody, even though, obviously the math is sitting out there for everyone to see. It's a pretty insidious thing, and we should, I guess, need to spend some time thinking about and analyzing and taking apart and reverse engineering why it is that real America trope has worked at all. And I may have something to do with, I don't know what, the popular nostalgia for a Norman Rockwell America, perhaps. And certainly that's what Trump hoped he was hearkening back to. But, with 60+% of us living in urban areas or in urban concentrations anyway, why we stand for it, I don't know. But still, I guess it's like one of those stupid tropes that doesn't make any particular sense, but that still sticks with us, like the idea that businessmen would make good politicians because they know how to, quote, get things done. Technocrats know how to get things done. Just, I don't know. People, I guess maybe there people would argue, well, but it's so difficult and the wheels of government turn so slowly and so many unintended consequences and boondoggles among the various government projects. Whereas with businessmen, they just cut to the chase. Well, they're different governmental structures very often. The boss gets to say what goes. So do dictatorships function on the surface more, quote unquote, efficiently than big bureaucratic governments? I guess so, but the law of unintended consequences applies to everyone equally, for one thing. There's plenty of business decisions that get made that backfire. And two, you're just basically asking whether dictatorships are or aren't more efficient in getting and the amount of time that goes into decision-making and execution versus a democracy. Okay, well, if efficiency is your issue, then stop talking about the value of democracy. Right? But no one wants to lay that one to rest, right? Now, hardly anyone is willing to say, well, democracy is nice, but efficiency is really what we're after here. And who cares if the decision is unfair or violates someone's rights, just so long as it's done quickly. There are very few people who endorse that view. All right. Well, we have that hanging out there. Oh, by the way, I did want to make sure that we at least mentioned and got on the record, and since we're getting close to the end of today's show, we might as well just close it out with those types of observations. Think Progress reporting that Donald Trump, the transition team, now demanding the names of federal employees who were working, I guess, within the Department of Justice to curb violent extremism. You'll recall the various reports that were that came to light and were controversial particularly among the Republican right and the extreme right, that took a sober look at the threat of domestic terrorism and domestic extremism, which seems to be fairly well concentrated on the right, and they viewed it as political targeting of their of people of their own people like them and their own ilk. And it was, I guess in a certain sense it's quite true, but it's just difficult to incite Quaker Peaks activists to violence in the same way that you can move Oath Keepers to it. I don't know exactly why that is. But anyway, just thought we should note that this is happening again. So this happens in addition to showing up at the Department of Energy and asking for people who had worked on climate change issues, showing up at the Department of State and asking for the names of people who worked on gender equality issues internationally, a favorite of Hillary Clinton's in particular, and now showing up where? I guess at the Department of Justice, and asking for the names of people who, Department of Homeland Security, I guess, is the target of this one, looking for people who had worked on the reports outlining the growing threat of so-called sovereign citizen extremists and other far-right activists who reject, the article says, sometimes violently, the authority of government. For example, the Bundy clan, for instance. So interesting that one department after another. And who showed up at DHS asking for this? Do we have a DHS secretary designate at this point, or is it just... because if we don't, then it can be laid at the feet of Trump himself and his transition a lot more clearly. But it is interesting that they keep showing up and asking for these lists. And I did see it dismissed by one response to Think Progress's tweet. Hey, that's what bosses do. They get the rosters. Of course, that stuff will be available to them post January 20th. And I guess I would just admonish, I hope nobody is foolish enough to be turning these lists over now. That's certainly information that, as much as I'd like to protect it, will be available to them post January 20th. And I say, at least, at the minimum, do your own damn homework. I'm not going to make this list for you. On January 20th, the pencil and paper are yours. You can sit down and make any list you like, except for the fact, of course, that it may lead to all sorts of unconstitutional and illegal targeting. But I think we've worked out the way for them, extra legal way around the roadblocks to dismissing civil servants. Simply harass them out of their jobs with an army of paid Russian trolls and or people to show up outside their homes with AR-15s looking to self-investigate the situations within. Dangerous precedent, of course, and like the violations of the emoluments clause, which opened up our long, wide-ranging conversation today, clear violation of law, clear violation of constitutional principle about which no one has any clue what to do. Because in America, we just don't like upheaval for some reason, and arresting the president or chucking him out of office, just, I don't know, it makes people nervous for one reason or another. We were handed these mechanisms by the founders. Remember the wisdom of the founders? It seems dumb, the Electoral College, but hey, that's the system they gave us. Hey, it seems scary to impeach somebody who violates the emoluments clause, but that's the mechanism the founders handed us. What happened to their genius? I don't know. We'll have to see if we can find it again and whether it was truly genius in the first place over the next coming weeks. Speaking, though, of what's coming next, we have, of course, the after show following up with all the news and headlines that we skipped in order to ponder the nature of the constitutional democracy with Armando today. For instance, calling California a failed socialist state, Trump's Secretary of Labor pick believes workers are overprotected and shouldn't get breaks. Russia's biggest bank hails Trump as the president of change, and when confronted about sanctions against Russia, Trump says the age of computer is confusing. And
from Daily Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Yes, those computers that complicate our lives bigly. We ought to get on with our lives, he says. And on the last half today, they'll be talking about Melania Trump, who wants to champion free speech while suing newspapers and 70-year-old bloggers for defamation. All of that and much more coming up next on the After Show with Wink and Justice. Stay tuned.